Today, Harry Dent's in Australia, and we catch up with him. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to another post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. And Harry, welcome to Australia. Good to see you.
Nice to be here, Martin.
Thank you. And you're going to be touring the country shortly and spreading the gospel, as it were. I want to drill into one thing in particular, and that is the role of central banks, right? Because it seems to me that if I look back over the last decade or so, the central banks did the QE, they've blown their balance sheets up, the Fed's trying to unwind it. The Japanese central bank's balance sheet is now bigger than the Japanese GDP. So what the heck is going on with central banks?
Well, I tell you, I mean, they've always done one thing. The Federal Reserve was started in 1913. And what they do is they manipulate short-term interest rates. When the economy gets weak, they push down short-term rates. That's supposed to encourage borrowing and help turn around the economy. Well, this time they did something different. Basically, Keynes came out of the Great Depression with a whole new theory that government should counter recessions. When the economy goes down, of course, businesses and consumers are going to spend and invest less, so the government should come in and spend more and build dams or whatever and borrow money to offset it. Well, that didn't really get accepted until 1970s. Nixon was the first one to say, we're all Keynesians now. 71 when he went off the gold standard. What they've done now, quantitative easing, is a whole nother thing, because they can just set short-term rates to whatever they want, and then the banking system and short-term rates follow that. What's important is long-term rates. Real borrowing, consumers buying mortgages, companies borrowing money to expand, comes with long-term loans, 20, 30-year loans. What quantitative easing does is it takes money out of thin air, and it injects it into the economy by buying bonds, and governments are buying their own bonds or related securities, government agency and stuff. And what they're doing is by buying bonds, it pushes down the long-term rates. So you can't just set that. You have to, if you buy bonds, rates will go down just by government buying more than people are selling. So that does something different. What people don't understand, the 10-year Treasury bond rate in any country, but like the 10-year Treasury bond in the United States or here in Australia, everything runs off of that. Corporate bonds are a risk premium above that. Junk bonds are another risk premium above that. So what in the US, for example, I have charts that show they literally pushed the 10-year Treasury bond down to zero adjusted for inflation. Money's free. Well, zero. They put short-term rates near zero. Money's free short-term, now it's long-term, but now you're affecting the whole risk curve. So now, so if corporate bonds used to be 6% and now they're 4%, and the government bonds used to be 4% and now they're 2%. Well, now companies got such cheap money, what do? They borrow money cheap, buy back their own stock, which reduces the number of shares and makes the earnings per share high. A company cannot be not growing at all, and the earnings per share is soaring. Earnings per share are growing way faster than earnings, and earnings are growing faster than the economy. So when they do this long-term rates, it reduces interest costs for consumers. Consumers are now paying maybe 4% for a mortgage instead of 6%. You know what that does to how much home you can afford to buy? My God, people go into a mortgage broker and say, oh yeah, I want to buy this little, so-and-so house, 3 bedrooms. They say, what are you looking at that? You should have a 5-bedroom house and blah, 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 blah. Oh, and you don't even have to put any money down and da-da-da. So people invest and overbuy. That drives up housing prices. Stocks have the biggest impact. Okay, so number one, corporations are paying less money borrowing money. Now, people say, okay, it's only so much. No, profit margins are only 5, maybe 10% of a company's sales. So if you just save 1 or 2 percentage points of your expenses on borrowing costs, your profits could go up 20% on that alone. So earnings are higher artificially. But Stocks, here's how stocks are valued theoretically. And this is how it basically works. You project earnings for 10 years and you discount that stream of earnings back to present value at the risk-free rate, which is the 10-year U.S. Treasury bond in the U.S. or in any country. So now a stock that would have been worth, $60 a share is worth $90 just because you're discounting these rates at almost nothing, and the money is worth, and the value of the company is worth more. And again, real estate goes up because people can buy more, and they do buy more, and they do borrow more. So it distorts the whole economy. So when they push down long-term rates, it particularly causes financial asset bubbles. So the Republicans have had it wrong. The gold bugs have had it wrong. They're all saying, oh my gosh, all this printing money is going to cause inflation. Japan's praying. Governments are praying for inflation. Can we just get 2%? Please, just 2%. Barely get it. Japan still can't get it. U.S. finally got it. Europe's getting close. Because what they're doing is they're printing money to fight deflation. In 2008, financial bubbles started to unwind. Debts started to fail. When debts fail, money that is pulled out of thin air also. Banks pull money out of thin air with just 10% reserve backing. And the reserves are our deposits, not theirs, so it's even worse than it sounds. This money disappears. When money disappears because loans are maybe cut in half, you have to, we go through Chapter 11 or bankruptcy, and creditors have to take 50 cents off. 50 cents, 50% of that money disappeared. Stocks, like in 1929 and 32, fell 89%. 89% of value of stocks disappeared and didn't come back for 24 years to those levels. Money disappears. That causes deflation. And governments now have realized with this new tool, they didn't have that so much in the past. This new tool called quantitative easing, they can fight deflation. But then that means what happened is all the bubbles that were bursting in 2008 and 9, housing, commodities, stocks, everything, loans failing, all stopped failing, and all these bubbles came back, and now we got a bigger stock bubble than ever. We have higher real estate in the U.S. than ever. Australia is off the charts. China's off the charts. So all they've done is create bigger bubbles, which have to burst. Bubbles burst. I always say, bubbles burst, and when bubbles burst, they burst twice as fast as they build, and they build rapidly, more than normal bull market. They burst in half the time, and they go back to where the bubble started. So for the U.S. to go back to where the bubble started, it would have to go down 75, 80%. For real estate, in Australia, it'd have to go down 40 to 50%. And on and on. Bubbles are not black swans. They're as predictable as anything. In fact, they track the male orgasm by Masters and Johnson chart. Exactly. It's not even a kind of like. It is the same thing. It's a financial orgasm. Orgasms take so much intensity to build that when they blow, there's no soft landing in bubbles. They blow. And people don't get that. And one of the points I make that not only, so when you have a bubble in real estate, you should expect 30 to 50% downside, not a normal 5 or 10%. That's, of course, what every Australian economist, it'll be 5 or 10. Oh, no, this is a bubble. Bubbles don't burst 5 or 10%. Stock bubbles, big ones, like the 70s, that was a major 13-year, 50%, 60 maybe. Real bubbles burst 70 to 90%. U.S. 89%. The Japanese bubble burst in stocks 80%. Tech bubble 78%. And in just a couple of years. But here's the worst part of it. The first blow to the bubble will come right off the bat when the smart money finally says this is over. And not only do they not buy into the bubble when the dumb money's running in the fastest, they are shorting it. They're saying this is over. The first crash is, on average, 7 bubbles in the last century, stock bubbles, 42% in the first 2.6 months. So people get hit right away. Bubbles burst violently. There is no soft landing. No government can react that fast. So a minimum, you're going to see that. And I tell people, man, Baron Rothschild said something very important. Richest man supposedly in the 1800s, somebody said, Baron, what's the secret to your wealth? He said, I always sold a bit early. That's all he said. He gets out a little early because he knows that when bubbles burst, they burst rapidly and violently. And now we have bigger bubbles around the world, more debt around the world. Now it's come in emerging countries instead of developed, which are more treacherous, more prone to crash, and almost always reliant on foreign debt, with China being the exception. And so they burst, and it's very hard to stop that. So we're only going to have a worse bubble burst this time around than the GFC. And governments have already blown their wad and put $16 trillion in printing money and all these bailouts and stuff. I think this one's going to get out of control at a minimum. And I think when governments do say, well, it's time, well, their excuse will be, well, we just didn't print enough. I think people are going to roll their eyes this time. I mean, $16 trillion, 20% of world GDP, and as you say, Japan, they printed 100% of their GDP. Yep. That's not enough out of thin air to print, and the next recommendation is going to come, and it's going to say, send everybody $10,000.
Yep. So the fundamental question I have is, it seems to me that the central banks are actually not really looking after the interests of the average person.
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is not a government agency. Yep. It is owned by the banks. Mm-hmm. It comes out of the banks. So who do they always protect? Yep. When they printed this money, did they say, I tell you, if you are going to print money, which I think always distorts the economy, always a bad thing. It's like a financially enhancing drug. And drugs don't work out well because it takes more and more and more, and then people eventually blow and collapse, and that's what bubbles do. If they are going to print money, at least send it to Homer Simpson. At least send that money to people who will spend it, who are not making money in this income inequality bubble world. Who owns all the financial assets? The top 1% own 50%. The top 10% own over 90%. Everyday people don't own much financial assets. Third world has almost zilch total. So it is not helping the everyday person, all of this sort of stuff. They're not looking. By keeping the bubble going, they're keeping the richest people going. The top 20% of people control 50% of the spending in the economy. That's why the economy's going well. Homer Simpson's not doing well. They're not happy. That's how Trump got elected. A bunch of all-star wrestling fans said, we've had enough. We want somebody to fight for us. Go punch China in the nose, go punch Wall Street in the nose. That's what happened here. So no, they're not looking after the interests. And if you don't let free market systems rebalance. Have recessions. Recessions are good. They're like a cold. They get rid of some stuff. They force efficiency. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913 to stop recessions. And guess what? 20 years later, we didn't have a recession. We had the greatest depression in all of history. Why? They never let the little things happen along the way, so you just created a bigger bubble, bigger crisis. So they distort the free market system. And that distortion blends over in democracy because the rich get so much richer. The Koch brothers, 2 billionaires in the United States, single-handedly vetoed Mitt Romney from running in the last election, Republicans. They just said, if Mitt runs, our money's out. We don't like him. Look, I don't know if they're right or wrong about that, but the point is 2 billionaires should not be able to decide who runs for office. So it distorts, this income inequality basically distorts democracy. So democracy, free market capitalism were the foundations of the late 1700s that created the greatest growth in wealth ever in history, more than all of human history put together in the last couple hundred years, and most of that in the last 100, 120 years. We're killing the golden goose. Central banks have taken over free market capitalism because they set the risk-free rates, which sets the rates of everything for stocks and other bonds and all other financial assets. And then special interests have taken over democracy. We don't have either anymore. And it's not that democracy or capitalism's failed, it's that we've destroyed them, and we've allowed government institutions to destroy them. And the central banks are the number one culprit, period.
Harry, thank you very much. Really appreciate that perspective, and I have to say I agree with you. I think they are part of the problem, not part of the solution.
Not the solution. I can't wait for the day where they say, okay, yeah, now we printed 16 trillion last time. Now our plan is 50 trillion, and then basically the people stand up and say, sorry, you're fired.
Yep.
We don't need you anymore.
We'll look out for that day. Thank you, Harry. So there you have it. More from Harry Dent. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching. See you next time.